Every garden carries a story. Some begin with a hopeful morning, a small pot, and a plan to make the yard feel a little more alive. We pick what looks charming in the moment. A leaf with a gentle shine, a vine that promises shade, a tree that blooms as if it were made for spring pictures. It all feels simple when the soil is cool and loose in our hands. But time has its own way of teaching. A plant that seemed harmless can change shape once it settles. Roots shift, branches lean, shadows fall in places we did not expect. That is when we learn that the beauty we trusted had another side waiting beneath it. So today we will walk through 7 plants you should never grow no matter how tempting they look at first glance. And then we will turn to 2 plants that deserve a place in any yard for how honestly they grow and how much they give back. A garden grows what we choose, yet it also remembers what we ignore. 1. Running bamboo. It starts with a single stem, then the earth begins to move in ways you never planned. At first, running bamboo looks almost polite. The canes rise straight, the leaves flutter like small green flags. The whole plant carries a quiet promise of privacy and calm. For many gardeners, that is enough to say yes, enough. But the ground tells another story. You kneel beside it one afternoon and notice that the soil feels slightly raised in places. A thin line here, a soft ridge there. Nothing dramatic at first glance. Afterward, you begin to see how those lines connect beneath the surface. Running bamboo spreads by sending rhizomes outward like long fingers, moving through the soil, even when the canes above seem still. Those rhizomes do not recognize fences or neat garden edges. They drift under boards, slide beneath stone, and slip into beds that the plant was never invited to. Over time, they reach the far end of a yard and pop up with new shoots as if they had always belonged there. A gardener might cut them back, a gardener might dig. Yet the plant works quietly in the dark soil, returning from any small piece of root that remains. The real trouble begins when those lines push into spaces that cannot move. A patio edge, a walkway, a border you built with care. The roots do not crack strong foundations, but they do press against joints and seams that were already vulnerable. Over seasons, that pressure adds up. A few lifted stones, a crooked line, a frustration that grows each spring when new shoots arrive long before any other plant has woken. Neighbors notice too. A shoot on their side of the fence, a thin cane rising where grass once lay. Conversation becomes awkward, responsibility becomes unclear, and what started as a single stem becomes a quiet burden that spreads wider than you expected. You could try to remove it. Many have. The work is slow. Every rhizome must be lifted, every fragment gathered. Even then, a forgotten piece can send up a new shoot months later, reminding you how persistent this plant can be. A garden should breathe, not brace itself against what runs beneath it. And bamboo is only the beginning. Some plants climb instead of run, changing the story in a different way. 2. English ivy. Bamboo runs, but ivy climbs. One moves beneath your feet, the other rises slowly until you realize it has taken the height you thought you controlled. Many gardeners choose ivy for the comfort it brings. A cool green patch, a soft shadow, a sense of calm that settles over a wall or fence. At first that feels harmless, then you look closer. The leaves overlap in tight layers, each one shaped like a small shield. The stems crawl across the soil as if testing the ground. In contrast, once they find something upright, they lift themselves and press small rootlets into bark brick or painted wood. Along the trunk, the vine gathers strength by holding steadily, not by pulling hard. The real change happens quietly. Ivy blocks light from the tree's own leaves. It adds weight that the branches never asked to carry. On windy days, that weight shifts and turns a simple gust into a risk. From here, the vine spreads into nearby beds and forms thick mats that stop seedlings before they ever see the sun. Year by year, the ground beneath becomes a single green layer with no room for anything else. Around the house, ivy behaves the same way. It does not break solid walls, but it looks for tired edges. A small crack, a loose bit of mortar, a gap in a joint. The rootlets settle in those places and deepen the wear that was already there. Months pass, a season shifts, then you notice a spot where the surface looks uneven and the plant has worked its way farther than you expected. Neighbors understand this story too. A vine slips under the fence, another reaches toward a shed. What once seemed charming becomes a long task shared between 2 yards, with no clear line where the work should start or stop. Many people remember planting one small pot of ivy near a shaded corner, thinking it would soften the space. Years later, they find it wrapped around trunks, edging stones, and old posts like an agreement they never meant to sign. The plant did not rush. It simply stayed with its nature until the garden adjusted around it. A wall or tree can stand tall, but ivy teaches how a slow hold can change its fate. And ivy is not the only plant that hides its weakness behind charm. Some trees break long before they ever look troubled. 3. Bradford pear. I love the way a Bradford pear looks in early spring, but I know the story changes once the petals fall. Those first days are hard to resist. The branches turn white all at once as if someone shook a snow globe over the yard. The crown fills with light. The street feels softer. People walking dogs stop just to look, and for a moment the tree seems like a small gift left on the sidewalk. But beauty can hide a weakness that does not show until the weather shifts. Further along the season, you notice how the limbs crowd each other. They lean inward, they squeeze for space. In practice, the narrow branch angles create pressure points that never really relax. The wood is brittle and the tree grows faster than its structure can support. Then comes a windy afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just a steady push of air rolling down the block. A sharp crack sounds from somewhere in the crown. A limb drops across the lawn, splitting in a clean tear that looks like it was waiting for an excuse. Turning back, you realize the same thing happened last year and the year before that. The tree did not decay. It simply grew in a way that made failure part of its design. A neighbor named Linda once told me her Bradford pears were her pride when she first moved in. She planted 3 of them along the driveway because they bloomed earlier than anything else on the street. 5 years later, a storm sent 2 heavy branches onto her car roof. The paint dented in 3 places, the windshield spidered. The cleanup crew cut the limbs into neat sections and stacked them by the curb, like reminders she never asked for. She laughed when she told the story, but it was the tired kind of laugh people use when the lesson has already cost them something. Out in open land, the tree behaves differently but causes its own trouble. Birds spread the seeds and thickets rise in empty fields. They crowd out native shrubs. They block sunlight from young saplings. Fields that once held wildflowers fill instead with a forest of thin trunks leaning at odd angles, each one carrying the same flaw, each one waiting for the same break. It is easy to love a tree that blooms on schedule. It is harder to accept that not every season is meant to last. Some trees fill a season, but only a few endure a life. And if a fragile tree can fail from within a simple herb, can overrun a garden without warning. Mint. Have you ever planted something because it smelled right in your hands? Mint invites that kind of decision. A single pinch releases a bright edge of scent, and in that moment, the plant feels harmless, even friendly. You imagine tea on warm evenings or a few fresh leaves tossed into a bowl of fruit. It seems like the easiest yes a gardener could make. Then the season moves forward. Tiny runners slide under the soil like hidden strings. You brush aside a bit of mulch one morning and see a thin root stretching farther than you expected. On the other hand, it looks innocent. Just a wandering shoot. Just a sign of a plant trying to settle in. Under the soil, though, that shoot is not alone. Mint sends out chains of rhizomes that drift across the bed, each one ready to rise into daylight wherever it finds space. Soon enough, the stems begin appearing in places no one planted them. A corner near the tomatoes, a crack between 2 stones, a patch near the hose where the soil stays slightly damp. The leaves look the same, everywhere soft and ready to pick, but each new sprout hints at a growing web beneath the surface. You pull one up. It comes out with a small tug, and for a moment you think the job will be simple. Then you follow the root and see how far it has chased the edges of the bed. Mint does not choke plants with weight or shadow. It crowds them by weaving around their roots. Perennials struggle as the soil fills with threads. Vegetables send up smaller leaves. Even hardy herbs feel the pressure. A gardener might try to dig it all out, but every rhizome must be lifted. Every fragment must be cleared. Miss one piece the size of your smallest fingernail and the plant will return as if nothing happened. People often share the same story. Someone plants a small clump by the path for convenience. They plan to pick a few leaves now and then. By late summer, the mint moves across raised beds, circles the stepping stones, and grows into the lawn. A home cook named Evan once told me he placed a pot of mint near his back steps because it reminded him of his grandmother's garden. Half a year later, he found shoots pushing through the gravel, climbing toward the light as if the yard belonged to them. Mint is lovely when contained, but open ground changes its nature. If you want the scent without the struggle, keep it in a buried pot or a raised box where the roots have clear limits. 5 Chinese-Japanese wisteria. The first time you stand under wisteria in full bloom, the air feels softer, and the petals brush your shoulders like a slow-moving curtain. The clusters hang in long lavender chains. The scent carries a faint sweetness. The whole scene has a weightless beauty that makes you pause without thinking. Many gardeners fall in love at that exact moment. Then you step closer. The vine twists around its support in a steady spiral, each turn pressed tight against wood or bark. Beyond the bark, the stem thickens with age, pushing outward as it grows. What looks graceful from a distance becomes something different when you study the way it holds on. The grip strengthens with every season, not because the plant is wild, but because twining is how it climbs toward the light. As seasons shift, that pressure begins to show. A porch rail starts to bow. An old fence post leans. A young tree carries a mark where the vine cinches its trunk. The twist bites deeper each year, narrowing the space the tree needs to expand. With enough years, the vine swells into a rope of hardened wood, and the host underneath struggles to move or breathe. The beauty above hides the strain below. Wisteria does not spread quickly like mint or send runners like bamboo. It chooses height instead. Once it reaches the top of a pergola or the limb of a tree, the long clusters create thick shade that dims everything below. Nearby shrubs lose shape as they stretch for light. Branches of the host tree weaken when the vine adds weight they were never meant to carry. On windy days, that added mass turns a gentle sway into something closer to a pull. Many gardeners discover this change by accident. A woman named Carla once told me she planted a single wisteria start beside her porch because she wanted a soft frame for summer evenings. 3 years later, the wooden rail bent inward, and the vine carved a deep groove into the side of her young oak. She had not noticed the shift day by day. It happened slowly, the way most pressures build when they are steady enough to hide. Cutting wisteria back is possible, but the roots remember every inch they owned. They send new shoots from old wood. They test the edges again. They wait for a moment of neglect to take hold. A vine that begins as decoration can become an anchor that pulls the garden out of balance, says knotweed. The thing about knotweed an older gardener once told me is that you think you're watching a plant, but really you're watching the ground learn how to take itself back. His voice carried the kind of certainty that only comes from years of seeing the same mistake repeated. At first glance, knotweed looks harmless enough. The stems rise in clean lines. The leaves open in neat layers. The growth feels orderly, almost polite. Then the speed hits you. New shoots burst through the soil with red tips sharp as pencils. They press upward in clusters. They climb past your knee before most plants finish waking up for the season. Under every layer of soil, the rhizomes are already moving. They creep sideways. They tunnel beneath borders. They anchor themselves deep enough that digging becomes guesswork instead of control. You pull one stem. It snaps easily. It gives you hope for a second. Then you follow the broken piece and realize it was only the top of a much longer chain. Every section you leave behind can root. Every fragment can rise again. In the long run, that is what makes knotweed less a plant and more a system, one that does not slow down simply because you want your yard back. A couple I met last year learned this the hard way. They cleared a patch behind their shed one winter, leveling the soil and laying a fresh bed of gravel. Spring came and so did knotweed. Shoots pierced straight through the gravel as if the stones were not even there. The stalks looked green and clean above ground, but their roots had been waiting in the dark since before the couple ever bought the house. You could hear the frustration in their voices when they described it, an emotion that sits somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. Hardscaping does not fare much better. Small gaps in paving become entry points. Retaining walls shift when rhizomes press against their weak seams. Patios lift in uneven patches. Some homeowners bring in professionals who work for several years cutting, monitoring, and treating until the plant loses enough strength to stop reclaiming the space. Knotweed does not behave with malice. It behaves with confidence. That confidence comes from its roots that spread wide, settle deep, and outlast every casual attempt to remove them. The stems above may look like bamboo imposters, but the real force is hidden far below where hands rarely reach. Some plants ask for room. This one claims the ground itself. 7 castor bean. Have you ever noticed how some plants look almost too dramatic, as if they are showing more confidence than they should? Castor bean enters the garden that way. It stands taller than most annuals, spreading its huge leaves like open hands catching the sun. The color shifts from deep green to reddish bronze depending on the light. For a moment, it feels like a plant built to impress anyone who walks by. Then the eye drops to the stems. They glow red in a way that looks almost polished. The leaves stretch wider than a dinner plate. In another view, the seed pods steal your attention next. They form as spiky spheres clustered in tight groups, each one ripening toward a brittle shell. There is nothing subtle about them. They rattle when the wind shifts. They fall with a thud when fully dry. Once the pods dry, the seeds scatter easily. They tumble into soil, roll toward the edges of walkways, and settle under low shrubs where no one notices them at first. The seeds look harmless, smooth, glossy, and patterned like small beads, but they carry a compound that changes everything. Even a few swallowed seeds can cause severe illness in people and pets. That fact alone turns admiration into hesitation. At that point, the gardener stops thinking about color and height and starts thinking about hands, paws, and curious eyes moving through the yard. A neighbor once planted castor bean for its bold tropical look. She loved the way it made her small garden feel larger. The leaves gave her yard a sense of drama she could not get from anything else. But one autumn afternoon, she saw her dog nose around a pile of fallen pods. She rushed outside, gathered the pods in a hurry, and checked the grass until her knees hurt. The next week, she removed the plant entirely. She told me she never meant to plant something that made her garden feel like a place to worry. Castor bean also leaves reminders. Seedlings appear in spring, rising in places the gardener never touched. Their stems look delicate. Their leaves start small. But each one means another seed fell, another shell cracked open, another chance for trouble if someone steps through barefoot or a child crouches to pick something shiny. The plant is striking, and there is no denying its presence. It grows with boldness. It fills space with confidence. It sends up leaves that move like slow fans in warm air. But beauty is not the only measure worth keeping. A garden should invite curiosity, not worry over what might fall into the wrong hands. After seeing how 7 different plants can reshape a garden in ways we never intended, the lesson becomes clearer. Trouble rarely arrives in loud moments. It arrives in inches and shadows, in roots that drift where we are not looking. But the opposite is also true. Some plants hold the ground gently. They stay where they're planted. They offer beauty without burden and growth without consequence. These are the kinds of choices that steady a garden, rather than test it. So, before we move on, let's shift our eyes toward the plants that earn their place. Quiet helpers, not quiet threats. 8. Serviceberry. Some plants prove their worth not by standing out, but by staying true to the space you give them. Serviceberry does exactly that. It grows with a steadiness that feels almost old-fashioned, the kind of rhythm you can understand without watching. The branches rise gently. The outline stays soft. Nothing in its posture suggests it will one day surprise you in the wrong way. In early spring, the blossoms arrive before the air has fully warmed. They appear as pale white petals, loose, simple, almost shy, and they brighten the garden without demanding attention. When seen closely, each flower looks like a small gesture toward the season ahead rather than a declaration. The bark stays smooth. The branches stay measured. Nothing sprawls or pushes. As months pass, the berries begin to form. They shift from red to a deep purple, carrying a sweetness that feels more like fruit from a wild hillside than something grown beside a patio. Birds come, but they come politely. They perch, feed, and move on, leaving the tree untouched. In return, the soil beneath stays calm, never heaving or cracking. The roots remain anchored in place, neither drifting nor testing the edges of nearby beds. A housewife named Marlene once told me she planted a serviceberry near her kitchen window because she wanted something gentle to look at while doing dishes. The first year, she enjoyed the spring flowers. The second year, she noticed how the berries ripened right as school ended, giving her a small joy during afternoons when the house felt too quiet. By the 5th year, she realized something else. Out of every plant she had ever tended, this was the one she never had to worry about. It never leaned. It never spread. It never asked her to rearrange the yard around it. She said it felt like having a neighbor who minds their own business, but is always kind. Autumn turns the leaves into warm shades of gold and amber. They fall cleanly. They do not smother nearby shrubs or leave behind tough stems to collect. Winter strips the tree down to a simple silhouette, and even then it adds a sense of calm, like a line drawn with care across a quiet sky. Nothing about serviceberry presses, climbs, invades, or insists. Good plants give more than they take. They settle where they are planted and brighten the seasons without rewriting the garden to suit themselves. A serviceberry reminds you that the best plants are partners, not guests you must supervise. 9. Eastern redbud. Some trees don't try to impress you, they simply bloom, and suddenly the yard feels more like home. Eastern redbud carries that kind of quiet charm. It stands as a small, patient presence through the cold months, holding a simple outline that does not draw attention. Then spring light arrives and everything changes at once. Before any leaves unfurl, the buds appear. They sit along the bare branches like little heart-shaped beads, each one swelling with color. Then the pink spreads. It coats the tree in a soft haze that feels almost handwritten, as if the season decided to underline itself across the yard. The blossoms do not shout, they hover. They brighten corners that spent winter in gray. And because the branches are thin and open, the color seems to float rather than crowd. As the weeks settle, the blossoms give way to gentle green leaves. They are shaped like small hearts and hang with a softness that makes the whole canopy glow. Beneath the tree, sunlight passes through, easily laying down dappled patterns instead of heavy shade. Nothing underneath strains to survive. The roots stay compact. The ground stays steady. A redbud never asks neighboring plants to move aside so it can take more than it needs. A single mother once told me she planted a redbud by her front walk because she wanted one cheerful thing that could greet her daughter every morning. The little girl called it the pink tree and measured her height against its trunk each spring. They took pictures beside it on the first warm day every year. By the time the girl reached middle school, the redbud had become part of their calendar, a marker of change that never caused trouble or demanded attention, only offered consistency in a life that didn't always feel consistent. Through summer, the redbud holds its shape. The leaves cast a gentle shade that children can read or play beneath. Bees perch on the flowers in early months, but they come lightly and leave lightly. Autumn softens the canopy into warm yellows. Winter strips the leaves away and reveals the same quiet silhouette, still balanced, still sure-footed, still in the exact place you planted it. Looking back, most gardeners who choose a redbud say the same thing: it is a tree that never makes you regret saying yes. It grows at a pace you can understand. It keeps its promises. It brings beauty without rewriting the garden around it. A redbud proves that a small tree can hold an entire season of comfort without taking anything away. A garden is never built in a single season. It grows from every choice we make, what we welcome, what we remove, and what we learn to leave alone. The 7 difficult plants showed how easily trouble can slip in when we chase beauty without checking the roots beneath it. But the 2 good ones reminded us of something quieter. A garden stays healthy when the plants respect the space they're given. You do not need dramatic shapes or fast growth to feel proud of your yard. You need plants that hold their ground with honesty. Plants that stay where they belong. Plants that give more comfort than concern. So as you plan the next corner to fill, choose the things that make your days easier, not heavier. A good garden doesn't compete with you. It partners with you. And when you step outside months from now, you'll feel the difference long before you see it.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.